Grieving veteran visited his late mother's house. What his loyal dog found made him sob. The road into Sapphire Ridge curled through the pines like a forgotten scar. Connor Hale drove it in silence, knuckles white on the steering wheel, the old truck rattling with every frozen bump. Snow drifted across the windshield in thin, slanted lines that looked almost like handwriting. His mother used to say winter had its own language. Today it felt like it was spelling out a warning. Baron sat upright in the passenger seat, massive head trained on the horizon. The German shepherd never slouched, never drifted. Even in the quiet, he held himself like a soldier who hadn't quite retired from his post. Connor wished he had half that steadiness. The house appeared between the trees, a weather-beaten cabin of pine and stone that should have felt familiar. Instead, it hit him like a cold punch to the ribs. His mother's porch light was still cracked from last year's storm. Her wind chime, made from old spoons, clinked weakly in the frozen air. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. He parked. The engine coughed twice and died. Baron jumped out before he'd fully opened the door, nose low to the snow, tail rigid. Every inch of the dog was alert. "Easy," Connor said. "Just give me a minute." But grief didn't give minutes. It hit all at once, the smell of cedar smoke clinging to the doorway, the dent in the porch rail where his mother used to rest her coffee mug, the empty rocking chair facing the ridge. Connor stood there, boots sinking into the snow, breath shaking in the cold. Baron nudged his hand once, grounding him. Inside, the house was colder than the outside. The wood stove was dark, the air still. Connor dropped his duffel by the door and took in the living room. Dust covered the bookshelf. The quilt his mother made during chemo lay folded on the couch, untouched since the day he'd last visited. He didn't expect company here. He didn't expect answers either. Just silence. A place to say goodbye. But Baron didn't behave like they'd walked into an empty house. The dog's ears snapped forward. His nails clicked on the floorboards as he moved from room to room, sniffing with precision. He circled the kitchen twice, whined low, then trotted to the hallway. "Baron," Connor warned, "slow down." The shepherd didn't listen. He pressed his nose to a section of floor and barked once, loud, sharp, a command, not a plea. Connor stepped over, crouched, and brushed aside a layer of dust. A square outline was hidden beneath the wood grain, not just a seam, a latch. He frowned. Mom didn't have a cellar. Baron barked again, tail stiff as a rod. His body lowered into a stance Connor hadn't seen since overseas. Fearless. Focused. Ready. "All right," Connor muttered. "Let's see what you've got." He wedged his fingers under the latch. It lifted too easily, like someone had opened it recently. The hinges groaned as the door swung up, releasing a rush of stale air that smelled of old earth and metal. A staircase disappeared into the dark. Connor's stomach tightened. His mother wasn't a secretive woman. She'd have told him if a hidden room existed. Or maybe she'd planned to. Maybe she ran out of time. He reached for the flashlight hanging near the door. Its beam carved a thin slice through the darkness below. Baron descended first. "Hold up," Connor whispered, but the dog ignored him, moving with silent confidence down the narrow stairs. Connor's heartbeat thudded in his ears as he followed. The basement wasn't a basement at all. It was a workshop. Tables covered in blueprints, rusted radios stacked along the wall, a metal locker dented along one side. And on the center table, covered in a thin layer of dust, lay a military-grade field recorder. Connor felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. His mother had never served, never worked with the military beyond volunteering at the VA. But his father had, before he died in a test site explosion that no one ever explained. Baron let out a sharp bark, snapping Connor back. What do you see?" The shepherd stood rigid beside the far wall, staring at a wooden crate tucked beneath a tarp. Connor approached, peeled the fabric back. A metal box sat inside, dented but intact. On the lid, in faded marker, was a name. Connor Hale. His throat tightened. Baron growled. A deep, warning tremor. Connor froze. "What is it, boy?" Then he heard it. Outside, a crunch in the snow. Slow, deliberate. Too heavy to be an animal. Someone was walking toward the house. Baron spun, sprinted up the stairs, and planted himself at the top, teeth bared. Connor killed the flashlight. His pulse hammered. Whoever was out there wasn't a neighbor. Sapphire Ridge had few visitors, and none who arrived quietly in the middle of a Montana winter. A shadow crossed the frosted window above. A man's silhouette. Tall. Motionless. Baron issued a low, murderous growl that echoed through the cabin. Connor's grief evaporated, replaced by something cold and sharp. His mother hadn't left a cellar. She had left a warning. And Baron had just found the first piece of it. He slowly reached for the metal box with his name on it. The front door handle rattled. Baron lunged, and in that instant, Connor understood the truth in his gut. Coming home wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Baron stood at the top of the stairs like a statue carved out of muscle and instinct. His body blocked the entrance to the hidden cellar, shoulders rigid, hackles raised. The growl in his throat wasn't loud, but it vibrated through the cabin floorboards like something alive. Connor had heard that sound once before, in a shelled-out building outside Rock Car, when an enemy fighter had stepped into the same corridor they were clearing. It was the sound of a warning, not a threat. Connor tightened his grip on the flashlight and stepped beside the shepherd. The trapdoor hung open behind them, the stale air of the basement drifting upward, metallic and cold. Everything inside him screamed that the stranger outside the window hadn't been a coincidence. Baron shot a glance toward the front door. Connor nodded. They moved as one. When he reached the mudroom, he noticed something he'd missed earlier. Snow had gathered inside the doorframe, nudged in by a boot. A footprint pressed into it, partially smeared as if someone had pivoted quickly. Connor's pulse kicked hard. He crouched, inspected it the way the military police had trained him years ago. The tread was sharp, recent. A work boot. Size 11 or 12? Not his, not his mother's. Someone had been right here, inches from the door. Baron sniffed the wood and rumbled in his chest. Then he pawed the floor once, sharp and deliberate, and shot his nose toward the back of the house. Connor didn't question it. Baron had found IED wires in loose sand. He could read danger like ink on paper. "Show me," Connor whispered. Baron led him through the hall, past old family pictures that now felt like ghost shadows, and back toward the hidden stairwell. The dog stopped at the edge of the open cellar door and pressed his nose downward. Connor knelt, aiming the flashlight beam across the first few steps. He expected dust, cobwebs, maybe an old jar or two. But the wood was scraped, fresh marks, long lines carved into the grain, as if something heavy had been dragged. And wedged against the fourth step was a thin splinter of new pine. Someone had been down there recently. Someone who knew how to hide their presence, but not enough to fool a shepherd trained to smell a 2-day-old rifle discharge. He descended slowly, one step at a time. Baron followed behind him, each paw landing silently, muscles coiled tight. The basement revealed itself again in the glow of the flashlight. The table, the radios, the metal locker, the crate with the tarp now fully removed, and the metal box with his name on it. But something else caught his eye this time. Footprints, not boots. Bare feet. Small. Light. A second set entirely different from the one outside. Connor crouched, breath locked in his throat. He traced the prints with the beam. They led toward the far corner where old shelves held jars of preserved peaches his mother made years ago. Except now, one jar was broken on the floor. Shards glimmered in the beam, sticky syrup dried like amber. The shelf beside it had been shifted an inch, leaving a faint square imprint on the wall, dust disturbed around it. A false back panel. Connor stood slowly. Baron's ears pricked at the same moment. "You smell it too," Connor whispered. He reached up, pressed his fingers along the edge of the shelf until he felt the catch. The panel snapped open with a soft click. Behind it, tucked into the wall cavity, was a tin box no larger than a lunch pail, dented at the corners, wrapped in a faded cloth, the color of desert sand. His mother had hidden this, not recently, but long ago. He lifted it out carefully. The cloth unraveled in his hands. Inside was a journal, 2 old dog tags, and a sealed envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. "Connor Hale, if you're reading this, you must know the truth your father died for." The words hit harder than a bullet. He didn't move, didn't breathe. The cabin seemed to hold perfectly still, as if the walls themselves were listening. His mother had never spoken about his father's final deployment beyond the official line. An explosion at an experimental test site. Classified. No survivors. A tragedy brushed under military silence. But this letter wasn't silence. Baron nudged his leg, urging him to keep going. The shepherd's eyes locked on the envelope, as if he sensed the weight inside mattered more than fear. Connor slid a thumb beneath the seal. That was when Baron froze. His entire body stiffened, one paw lifted mid-step. Then he threw his head back and released a howl so piercing, so primal, it sliced through the cabin like a blade. Connor bolted upright. Baron raced up the stairs, claws scraping against wood, barking now with a violence Connor had only heard in war zones. Someone was in the yard. Connor sprinted after him. Baron hit the living room ahead of him, skidding across the old rug, and launched himself toward the front window. His bark cracked through the air like gunfire. Connor swept up his mother's old fire poker, the closest thing to a weapon, and edged toward the window frame. Outside, the yard was swallowed in blue twilight. Snow drifted in soft circles. Pine branches swayed like dark silhouettes. At first he saw nothing. Then a figure stepped from behind the shed. Tall, hooded, moving with the precision of someone who knew how to avoid being seen. Baron barked again, deeper, louder. The man didn't flinch. He stood there a full second, head tilted toward the cabin, as if confirming something. Then he turned and vanished into the tree line with frightening calm. Connor slammed the deadbolt on instinct. His breath came sharp and fast. Whoever that was hadn't come to rob a house. He hadn't come to trespass. He came because of the basement, because of the box, because his mother had hidden something someone wanted back. Baron pressed his body against Connor's leg, eyes still fixed on the window. "That's twice today you saved my ass," Connor whispered, placing a hand on the shepherd's head. "And I've got a feeling it won't be the last." The wind outside picked up, rattling the porch chime. The old house groaned in its bones. Baron's tail didn't move. He was still listening, still guarding. Connor looked down at the envelope again. The handwriting shook as if written by someone who knew time was running out. He slipped it into his jacket. The truth his father died for wasn't buried overseas. It had been waiting under this house. And now someone else knew he'd found it. Connor waited until Baron's barking faded into a restless rumble before returning to the cellar. The cold air felt heavier now, as if the house itself knew he had crossed a threshold his mother never wanted him to cross alone. He descended slowly, listening to the creak of each step, flashlight sweeping across shadows that seemed deeper than before. The letter from his mother remained sealed in his pocket, almost pulsing with its own heartbeat. But something told him there was more down here he needed to see before he opened it. something his mother had hidden, not just from strangers, but from him. Baron followed, paws silent, posture rigid. The shepherd wasn't sniffing randomly anymore. He moved with intent, nose low, ears angled as if tracking a memory in the dust. Connor reached the center table and pulled the cloth off the tin box completely. Beneath it, the journal was thicker than he realized, pages swollen from age. He opened it carefully. Inside, the handwriting wasn't his mother's. It was his father's. Technical sketches filled the first pages, vault structures, signal diagrams, pulse wave emitters, and frequency channels written in a shorthand he recognized from old engineering manuals. Then on page 6, a title caught his eye. Project Echo Vault. Connor felt a strange shiver climb his spine. He traced the title with a fingertip, whispering it aloud. Echo Vault. His father had been working on something classified, something far above the rank he'd held. The diagrams looked like a hybrid between secure communication systems and deep storage encrypted tech. A vault, yes, but not for gold or documents. Something far more important. Baron growled softly, drawing Connor's attention to the far wall. The dog's nose hovered over a second crate Connor hadn't noticed earlier. It was wedged behind the metal locker, half buried in dust. Connor hauled it forward. Inside was a stack of blueprint tubes wrapped with military-issue straps. He unrolled the first one on the table. It was a full layout of a bunker, octagonal, reinforced, with multiple fail-safes. The bottom corner bore a stamp. Department of Defense, restricted access, Tier 4 laboratory. His chest tightened. His father wasn't a simple engineer. He wasn't stationed at a routine test site. He was building something the government didn't want tracked. Baron nudged Connor's elbow, harder this time, and pointed his nose toward an old tape recorder sitting beneath a tarp. Connor brushed off the dust and clicked it on. Static. Then a woman's voice, trembling but clear. Connor, if you're hearing this, I don't know how much time I have left. His mother. He froze. Baron froze with him, as if understanding the gravity in the tone. I need you to know the truth about your father. They told you he died in an accident. That's not what happened. He discovered something inside Echo Vault they didn't want to lose control of. Connor swallowed hard, hands gripping the recorder. He planned to expose it. They made sure he couldn't. The message deteriorated into static, then snapped back. Connor, trust no one from the old unit. If they find out you're looking, they'll come for you too. Your father didn't die protecting a secret. He died trying to free one. The tape clicked off. Connor stood there, unable to breathe for a moment. His father hadn't died a hero the way the military framed it. He died on the wrong end of a betrayal. Baron stepped closer, resting his head against Connor's hand. A grounding weight. Footsteps outside thundered through the silence. Not walking. Running. Baron's head snapped toward the stairs. His ears locked onto something Connor hadn't heard yet. Then he bolted up the steps, barking with a ferocity that rattled the tools hanging from the ceiling. Connor snatched the flashlight and sprinted after him. At the top of the stairs, Baron was already at the back door, claws tearing at the floor, body angled toward the yard. Connor grabbed the handle and threw it open. Cold air rushed in. Baron leapt into the snow, nose to the ground, following a trail invisible to human eyes, but impossibly clear to him. Baron, wait! The shepherd didn't wait. He bounded past the porch and toward the tree line where the stranger had vanished earlier. Snow exploded beneath his paws. Connor's boots hit the ground, sinking deep as he chased the dog. The wind howled through the pines, branches whipping, the world shrinking into icy breath and shadows. Baron stopped abruptly 10 yards from the tree line and lowered his head. Connor caught up, heart pounding. What do you have, boy? Baron pawed gently at the snow, then bit the edge of something buried. Connor knelt beside him and brushed the snow aside. A brass shell casing, still warm, which meant whoever had been here wasn't just watching. He had fired a shot. But at what? Connor scanned the trees. Empty. Silent. Too silent. Baron's growl deepened. The fur along his spine stood straight. In the shadows of the forest, a figure stood behind the trunk of a lodgepole pine. Barely visible. Watching. Unmoving. Connor's breath caught. For a moment the world held its breath. Baron stepped forward, barely restraining a bark. The figure shifted one step to the left, revealing just enough of his outline to show he wanted to be seen. Then he lifted his hand and held up something that glinted. A dog tag. Connor's heart stopped cold. His father's name was on it. Baron lunged, barking so violently the sound tore through the forest. But before Connor could take a step, the figure turned and vanished into the woods with deliberate calm, as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Connor stared into the darkness, the cold sinking deeper now, not into his skin, but into the truth unraveling beneath it. His father wasn't just killed, he was hunted, and whoever did it had just left a message. Baron pressed against Connor's leg, eyes locked on the forest like he expected it to breathe again. Connor tightened his jaw. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. The night fell hard over Sapphire Ridge, swallowing the cabin and the forest in a blue-black quiet that felt too heavy to be natural. Connor kept the lights off. He had learned long ago that darkness could be a friend if you knew how to use it. Baron stayed planted at the window, head low, breath steady. He was waiting. Listening. The shell casing in Connor's pocket felt like a pulse against his leg. When the first window shattered, it didn't even sound like glass. It sounded like a decision being made. Baron lunged before Connor had even turned. A metal cylinder rolled across the wooden floor, clinking like a coin. Smoke hissed from its seams. Instinct kicked in. Connor grabbed the canister and hurled it back through the broken window. A muffled pop followed, scattering snow outside. Baron barked, one deep, decisive bark, pointing toward the side door. Then came footsteps. More than one. Heavy boots moving fast. Connor didn't hesitate. He grabbed his jacket, shoved his mother's letter inside, slung the tin box under his arm, and snapped his fingers toward Baron. The shepherd leapt, hitting the back door just as Connor yanked it open. They sprinted into the forest, snow exploding around their boots and paws. Branches whipped across Connor's face. His breath came out white and harsh. He could hear the intruders behind them, 3, maybe 4, moving with practiced formation. Not thieves, not random trespassers. A team. Baron stayed several paces ahead, guiding Connor through the darkness like he could see through the trees. Maybe he could. His ears flicked constantly, adjusting, triangulating. His paws barely touched the snow. Gunshots cracked behind them. Baron veered left sharply. Connor followed without thinking. A bullet tore through bark inches from his head. They ducked behind a massive fallen spruce, its trunk half buried in snow. Connor crouched low, breath shaking but controlled. He whispered into the dark. "Who are they, boy? What do they want?" Baron's head shifted toward the ridge. Another bark, short and sharp. The answer arrived before Connor could move. A voice carried through the trees, calm, steady, too confident for someone who had just missed his shot. "Connor Hale," the man called out. "You have something that doesn't belong to you." Connor pressed a hand on Baron's back, steadying the shepherd. Baron's muscles twitched under his palm, ready to explode forward. "Come out," the voice continued. "We are not here to kill you." The lie was too smooth to believe. Connor peeked through the branches. A tall man stood in the clearing, night vision goggles hanging around his neck, rifle slung across his chest. 3 others fanned out behind him with the ease of soldiers who had worked together a long time. They weren't lost hikers. They weren't criminals. The emblem on the man's jacket confirmed it. Northwell Dynamics, a defense contractor, one Connor knew by reputation, one that had worked directly with high-clearance military projects, one that had employed his father. Barron let out a low growl. The man lifted a hand. Your father kept sensitive materials when he walked off the project. We're only here to retrieve what belongs to the agency. Connor felt something break loose inside him. Not fear. Anger. My father didn't walk off anything, he said loud enough for the forest to return the echo. He died. The man exhaled in a way that made Connor's skin crawl. Is that what they told you? Barron barked, furious. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Give us Echo Vault, and this ends quietly. Connor didn't answer. Barron didn't wait for permission. The shepherd leapt from behind the log, launching into the open with a roar that belonged on a battlefield. The intruders jerked back, startled by the sudden explosion of fur and muscle. Barron, no! But the dog wasn't attacking. He ran straight past them, toward something else. Connor scrambled up the ridge, following the dog's trail. Barron tore through the trees, paws moving fast, nose locked on a scent deeper and older than the footprints behind them. The intruders shouted, shots flying, but Connor didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the shepherd, trusting him completely. Barron slowed suddenly at the edge of a frozen creek. He sniffed the ground, then began digging through the snow with frantic precision. His paws hit something solid. Connor dropped beside him, brushing snow aside with his bare hands until a rectangular slab emerged, a rusted metal hatch covered in frost. What is this? Connor muttered. Barron stepped back and barked once fiercely. A second entrance, a hidden one. Connor wiped away snow and read the faint letters burned into the metal. Site Echo Vault, restricted access, authorized personnel only. His father had been here, not overseas, not at the test site. Here, on this ridge, working in secret beneath the very forest where Connor played as a boy. Behind them, the forest erupted with shouts. Flashlights cut across the trees. Footsteps thundered closer. Barron planted himself between Connor and the approaching lights, body low, ears flat, teeth bared in a snarl that vibrated in the cold air. Connor placed his hand on the hatch handle and pulled. It didn't move. He pulled harder. Nothing. Barron barked urgently, pushing his nose against a small rusted lever beside the hatch. Connor yanked it down. The mechanism groaned, then the hatch popped open with a violent hiss, releasing a burst of cold air from below. The shouts grew louder. Connor looked at Barron. Inside, now! Barron dove through the opening first, disappearing into darkness like he'd been trained for this moment his whole life. Connor followed, pulling the hatch down, just as flashlight beams swept over the clearing above them. The metal door clanged shut. The darkness swallowed them whole. But this time, Connor wasn't running. He was walking straight into the heart of the truth his father had died to protect. The hatch sealed above them with a metallic thud, cutting off the shouts and flashlight beams from the surface. Darkness pressed in like a second skin. Connor's breath fogged in the cold air as he swept the flashlight beam along a concrete corridor stretching deeper underground. Barron moved ahead, limping slightly from the cold, nose twitching. Even in the dark, the shepherd's presence was a force, a compass pointing Connor toward whatever truth lay buried down here. The corridor sloped downward, walls lined with rusted pipes and cables. Signs were stenciled in faded red paint. Level B, secure access. Echo Vault subsection. Connor tightened his grip on the tin box and followed the dog. After 100 feet, the hallway opened into a chamber, lit by a single flickering emergency bulb. Dust hung like mist in the pale light. In the center stood a reinforced door with a biometric scanner, long dead, but the door itself had been jammed open decades ago. Barron paused at the threshold, sniffing the air. Then he stepped through. Connor followed. and stopped dead in his tracks. The room was a vault. Rows of steel cabinets stretched along the walls. Computers old enough to be Cold War relics sat on long tables, screens cracked, wires spilling out like veins. But it wasn't the equipment that froze him. It was the name painted on the central data pod. Dr. Lillian Hale. Restricted custodian access. His mother. Connor felt his knees weaken. Barron looked up at him, sensing the shift, tail low, pressing close as if lending strength. "She was here," Connor whispered. "She worked down here." Which meant she wasn't just a volunteer at the VA. She had been involved in whatever EchoVault actually was. He approached the pod, running his fingers along its surface. The metal was cold, but the interior hummed faintly. Something inside was still active. He pressed the release switch. A panel slid open with surprising smoothness, revealing a small console with a single blinking indicator. Next to it lay a recorder, similar to the one in the cabin, but newer, protected in a plastic case. Connor hit play. His mother's voice filled the vault, raw and tired. "Connor, if you're hearing this, I failed to keep the danger from reaching you." He swallowed hard. "Your father didn't abandon us. He erased himself. For us. For EchoVault." Barron whimpered, leaning against Connor's leg. "EchoVault wasn't a weapon. It was a fail-safe. Your father discovered that Northwell planned to repurpose it for a classified project, something that could manipulate encrypted communications across the defense grid. A single breach could destabilize everything. He tried to shut them out, and they silenced him." Connor felt something break inside, a truth that hurt more than any lie. His mother continued, voice cracking. "I stayed on the project to bury the last of EchoVault, to keep it away from Northwell. If they find this place before you do, everything your father died for will be lost." The recording clicked off. Silence swallowed the room. Connor lowered his head. Barron nudged his hand, then pressed his forehead into Connor's thigh, insistent, comforting. "You were right to bring me here," Connor whispered. "You always are." Then the entire vault vibrated. Barron snapped rigid, ears up. A muffled thud echoed through the corridor, then another. They were breaching the hatch. Barron growled and positioned himself between Connor and the entrance. His posture changed, shoulders forward, chest low, teeth bared. The shepherd wasn't afraid. He was ready. Connor grabbed the console drive, the heart of EchoVault, and shoved it into his jacket. "Barron, we need to move." But it was already too late. 3 armed men burst into the chamber, rifles raised. Their lasers sliced through the dust. Connor dove behind a cabinet. Bullets shredded the metal above him. Barron charged. The shepherd launched forward like a missile, jaws clamping on the first attacker's arm with bone-snapping force. The man screamed and fell backward, his rifle clattering across the floor. "Barron, back!" But Barron didn't back down. A second attacker swung his rifle. The butt struck Barron across the ribs. The dog yelped but did not fall. He lunged again, taking the man to the ground in a violent tumble. The third attacker fired. The shot echoed like thunder. Barron collapsed. Connor's scream tore through his throat, raw, feral. He sprang from behind the cabinet, tackling the shooter and slamming him into the steel pod. The man's rifle misfired, ricocheting off the wall. Connor grabbed the attacker by the vest and threw him into a stack of equipment. Sparks burst from a shattered console. The other 2 scrambled back toward the door, dragging their injured comrade. "Grab the drive," one shouted. "We'll finish the dog later." Connor lunged toward Barron. The shepherd lay on his side, breath shallow, fur soaked with blood near his shoulder. His chest heaved in ragged movements, but his eyes stayed open, locked on Connor, refusing to surrender. No, stay with me," Connor whispered, lifting the dog's head gently. "Barron, look at me." Barron's tail twitched once, a weak movement, but a message. Still here, still fighting. Outside the vault, boots thundered away. They were falling back. Not retreating. Regrouping. Connor knew this wasn't over. They'd be back in minutes, maybe seconds, and this time they'd bring more. Baron let out a soft, pained whine. Connor cupped the dog's muzzle with trembling hands. "I'm not leaving you," he whispered. Then he looked at the console drive in his jacket, the very thing his parents died protecting. His father's legacy, his mother's final act. The truth Northwell was willing to kill for, the truth that could tear the nation's defenses apart if it fell into the wrong hands. He had one choice, but it was the kind of choice that splits a man open. Save Baron, or save Echo Vault. Baron coughed, eyes fluttering. Connor pressed his forehead to the shepherd's and exhaled shakily. "Please," he whispered, "give me a sign." Baron lifted his paw, barely an inch, and pressed it against Connor's chest. Not toward the data, toward him, toward home. Connor closed his eyes, tears burning hot. He understood. Baron wasn't telling him to choose. He was telling him to survive. With him. Connor scooped the wounded shepherd into his arms, blood soaking his sleeve, and turned toward the emergency tunnel leading deeper underground. Behind them, boots pounded closer. Ahead, darkness stretched like a narrow road. Connor held Baron tighter. "This time," he whispered, "I'm not losing family." Snow hammered across the ridge in violent sheets, carving white scars through the dark as Connor staggered upward with Baron in his arms. The shepherd's fur was slick with blood, his body limp, his breaths shallow and uneven. Each exhale felt like a countdown Connor had no power to reset. The emergency tunnel had led them out through a fissure halfway up the mountain, an opening barely wide enough for him to crawl through while sheltering the dog. Now the cold hit them with full force, slicing through Connor's jacket, clawing at his lungs. Below, the forest looked small and distant. Too quiet, too still. Baron didn't move. "Stay with me," Connor whispered, tightening his grip. "You hear me? You stay." A crack echoed from behind him. Connor spun, slipping on ice. A figure stepped out from the rocks, tall, wearing a snow mask and a white Northwell parka. He held a suppressed pistol. Calm. Precise. The same man Connor had seen in the woods holding his father's dog tag. The commander. "Put the dog down," the man said, voice steady despite the wind. "And hand over the drive." Connor shifted Baron against his chest. "You shot my father. You hunted my mother. You came for me." "You were never the target," the commander said. "Echo Vault was. Your family just refused to let go." Connor inhaled sharply. "What's in the system?" "A key," the man replied. "A back door into the defense grid. Your father built it, and we were tasked to maintain it." Connor felt the truth land like a blade. "My father didn't build a weapon." "No," the commander said. "He built a way to stop one, and then realized that a door that can stop can also be used to take control." Baron whimpered weakly, eyes flickering. Connor stepped back, boots skidding on the ice. The cliff was behind him. Cold wind hit the exposed skin of his neck. "You're not leaving this mountain," the commander said. "Either give me the drive or die holding it." Connor felt for the device tucked inside his jacket. The heart of Echo Vault. The reason his parents were dead. The reason Baron was bleeding in his arms. His hand brushed something cold beside the drive. The override switch. The same one his mother mentioned in the recording. The failsafe his father built into the system. The final option. Connor looked the commander in the eye. "You want Echo Vault?" he said quietly. "Come take it." He dropped to one knee, set Baron down gently, and reached for the drive. Not to surrender it, to activate it. The commander understood a second too late. "Stop!" Connor twisted the switch. A sharp tone pulsed from the drive, high, metallic, unmistakable. Deep beneath the snow-packed ridge, the Ecavolt facility answered. A rumble rolled through the mountain, low at first, then violent enough to shake snow from the pines below. The ice under Connor's boots cracked like breaking glass. The commander fired. Connor dove, snow exploding at his side. Baron barked, weak, broken, but still defending. The commander fired again, but the blast beneath them swallowed the shot. The ground convulsed. Then the mountain roared. The underground bunker detonated in a bloom of fire and pressure, sending a massive wave of snow and debris upward through the vent shafts and fault lines. The forest below vanished under rolling white. Connor shielded Baron with his body as the shockwave hit, knocking them both onto the ice. The commander stumbled, slipping toward the edge. He grasped for a rock, fingers digging in. The snow surged. The commander's eyes widened with the first emotion Connor had seen in them. Fear. Then he was gone, swallowed by the avalanche his own mission created. Connor dragged himself upright, shaking from the impact. The mountain still trembled beneath him, the remnants of the Ecavolt facility collapsing far below. A plume of smoke and snow spiraled upward like a dying signal into the dark sky. It was over. Northwell couldn't reclaim Ecavolt. No one could. Connor turned to Baron. The shepherd lay on his side, chest rising shallowly, frost forming around his muzzle. His eyes fluttered, unfocused. Connor dropped to his knees, scooping the dog into his arms. "Baron, hey, stay with me." The dog didn't stir. Connor pressed his forehead to Baron's, breath shaking so violently he could barely speak. "Don't do this. Not you. Please." Baron exhaled one last weak breath. Then his body went still. The world around Connor went silent. The wind, the collapsing snow, even the burning in his lungs. Everything faded under the weight of the moment. "No," Connor whispered. "No, no, no." He clutched the limp shepherd tighter, rocking him in the middle of the frozen ridge. His scream ripped across the mountainside, raw and broken, echoing down into the valley where the bunker burned beneath the snow. The avalanche settled. The smoke thinned. The mountain watched in cold silence as a grieving veteran knelt in the snow, holding the dog who had just given everything for him. Connor buried his face in Baron's fur. "I'm not losing you," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Not like them. Not today." The wind shifted. Baron didn't move. But Connor wasn't done fighting. The drive down the mountain felt longer than any deployment Connor had ever been on. His knuckles were bloodless around the steering wheel, and the heater struggled to chase away the cold buried in his bones. Baron lay on the back seat, wrapped in Connor's jacket, his breaths thin but steady. Every rise and fall of the dog's ribs felt like a coin flip Connor couldn't afford to lose. "Stay with me, buddy," he whispered, glancing into the rear-view mirror. "We're almost there. Just hang on." The lights of Sapphire Ridge flickered through the pines as dawn broke in pale streaks across the snow. The little mountain town was waking up, unaware that a war had ended on the ridge above them. The veterinary clinic sat beside the old post office, a squat log building with a tin roof half covered in frost. Connor parked crooked in the snowbank and rushed inside, scooping Baron into his arms. Dr. Leah Grant met him at the door. Her expression shifted instantly from mild morning fatigue to alarm. "What happened?" "He took a round protecting me," Connor said, voice low, tight. "Left side, near the rib. He's losing blood." Leah didn't waste a second. "Bring him in." They moved through the narrow hallway into the exam room. Leah snapped on gloves and motioned for Connor to lay Baron on the table. The shepherd whimpered as his side touched the steel surface, but his eyes fluttered open. "Still here, still fighting." Leah's hands moved quickly, checking his pulse, lifting the matted fur, assessing the wound. "He's strong," she murmured. "This would have killed most dogs outright." Connor swallowed hard. "He's not most dogs." Leah shot him a brief look. No, he isn't. She motioned him back. Connor, let me work. Go get some air. I'll come get you when I know more. He hesitated, hands hovering near Baron's head. The dog blinked slowly, a faint thump of his tail against the table. Okay, soldier. I got this. Connor stepped out into the waiting room, then outside entirely. The cold slapped him awake. The town was quiet, a few trucks rumbling by, but the distant sirens from the ridge were growing louder. Something had been reported. Something was coming. He didn't have to wait long. 2 black SUVs rolled into the parking lot, stopping with military precision. The doors opened and men in windbreakers stepped out, badges glinting. FBI. The lead agent approached, tall, mid-50s, a face carved by years of seeing too much. Connor Hale? That's me, Connor answered, straightening instinctively. I'm Special Agent Marcus Reddick. The man said, We need to talk about what happened up on Sapphire Ridge. Connor's jaw clenched. You found what's left of the bunker. Reddick nodded. Satellite picked up the blast. State police sent up a drone. Then we found tracks, a firefight, a collapse consistent with shaped charges. You want to tell me what you were running from? Connor exhaled slowly. Not running, stopping something. He opened the truck door and pulled out the metal binder he'd taken from the facility. His mother's notes, his father's sketches, files on EchoVault stamped with dates decades old but still pulsing with danger. Reddick accepted the binder, flipping it open. The agent's eyes narrowed. This is classified material, level Omega in some sections. It's also my family's blood. Connor said, Take it. Do whatever you need to do, but don't let them rebuild it. Reddick studied him carefully. Them, Northwell Dynamics. Connor nodded. They were there last night. They wanted EchoVault active again. Reddick's jaw tightened. We've had them on our radar for years, but nothing stuck. Defense contracts that vanished, off-the-books funding, black site engineering. And now this. He tapped the binder. They've been watching your family for more than a decade. The words landed like a fist. Connor stepped back. My mother. My father. Yes. Reddick said. Your father tried to expose what EchoVault was becoming. Northwell silenced him. Officially, his death was an overseas accident. Privately, we've suspected Northwell involvement for years. Connor felt the air leave his chest. All the years of unanswered questions suddenly had edges sharp enough to cut through bone. What about my mother? He asked quietly. Reddick's expression softened. She kept trying to warn us. There were messages sent through intermediaries. Then she went silent. We didn't know she'd hidden evidence. She died protecting it, Connor said. And last night, you finished what your parents started. Reddick replied. Connor looked away toward the clinic window. He could see Leah inside, moving around Baron, her silhouette steady and focused. Agent Reddick, he said, you have everything now. Do the right thing with it. We will, Reddick said. And Connor, I'm sorry this fell on you. Connor didn't answer. Because somewhere inside that clinic, fighting for every breath, was the only living thing that had never once left him behind. Leah pushed open the door. Connor, she called. You should come in. His legs felt heavy as he stepped inside. The scent of antiseptic filled the air. Baron lay on a padded mat, wrapped in gauze, an IV in his foreleg. His eyes were half open, dazed but alive. Alive. Leah folded her arms, relief smoothing her features. He lost a lot of blood. The bullet missed the lung by a quarter inch. If you'd gotten here 10 minutes later... She didn't have to finish. Connor knelt beside the dog, placing a hand gently on his head. Baron leaned into the touch despite the pain. Still loyal, still here. He'll need time, Leah said. But he's a fighter. He wants to stay with you. Connor swallowed the burn in his throat. I'm not losing him. Not after everything. Leah smiled faintly. Then you won't. Behind him, Reddick closed the binder and looked at the wounded shepherd. Brave dog, the agent said quietly. Braver than most men I've known, Connor replied. For the first time since the mountain exploded beneath him, Connor felt something unfamiliar rise through the exhaustion and grief. A beginning. Wrapped in gauze, hooked to oxygen, half-conscious but refusing to quit, Baron was still fighting. And so would he. Justice had begun. Healing would follow. Together they would finish the last chapter his parents never got to write. Winter had returned to Sapphire Ridge, but this time it carried a gentler weight. Snow drifted across the pines in soft veils, settling on rooftops and fence posts the way dust settles over old wounds. The mountain no longer growled with buried machinery. The nights were quiet now, the kind of quiet Connor once feared but had slowly learned to live with. A full year had passed since the Echovault explosion, and somehow, through all of it, Baron survived. The shepherd still favored his left hind leg. The injury had knitted awkwardly despite surgeries and months of rehabilitation, giving him a slight limp. But the limp never slowed him down. If anything, it made him more determined, more deliberate. Every step he took felt like an act of defiance against the men who tried to take everything from him. Connor understood that kind of defiance. He walked the same way these days. He had moved back into his mother's cabin that spring, not because he wanted to cling to the past, but because the place deserved to breathe again. The windows had been replaced, the roof patched, the broken door rebuilt. He sanded her old rocking chair by hand and put it back on the porch where she always sat at sunset. He planted her favorite wildflowers along the path, even though they probably wouldn't bloom until spring thaw. Every repair felt like stitching a wound he'd carried for decades. Some days he worked until his palms blistered, the smell of sawdust clinging to his clothes long after dusk. Other days he simply sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, listening to the house creak with the cold and imagining it exhaling after everything it had held in. Baron was always nearby, limping but loyal, always watching the door, the window, the tree line, always guarding. They shared the kind of quiet only two survivors could understand. On the first heavy snowfall of December, Connor stepped onto the porch and drew a long breath, letting the cold settle into his lungs. A year ago, this kind of morning would have made him flinch. Today it felt like a prayer whispered back from the mountains. He tossed a stick into the yard. Baron bounded after it, slower than he used to be, but with the same conviction. The shepherd retrieved it proudly, tail sweeping wide arcs in the snow. "Good boy," Connor said, ruffling his ears. "Feels like you're getting stronger every day." Baron dropped the stick, then suddenly froze. His ears pricked. His nose dropped to the ground. "What is it?" Connor asked, instinctively scanning the woods. Baron ignored him, snout buried in the snow. He pawed at the frozen ground, scraping aside layers of frost. Then he barked sharply, a high, urgent sound, not fear, not threat. Discovery. Connor's heartbeat kicked up. Baron dug faster, snow flying in frantic bursts until his paws struck something solid beneath the soil. A wooden edge. Connor knelt beside him, brushing away the earth. A small wooden box slowly emerged from the ground, weathered but intact. Someone had buried it deep, deliberately. His breath caught. He recognized the carving burned into the lid. A single looping pattern, the way his mother always marked things she wanted him to find someday. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible. Baron sat beside him, tail slow, eyes fixed on the box as if he understood exactly what it meant. Connor pried the lid open. Inside was a folded letter wrapped in cloth to protect it from moisture. The paper had yellowed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. The looping curves, the soft tilt of the pen strokes. His mother's hand. Connor felt something tremble inside him. Not fear, not shock. Something older. Something like finally exhaling. He unfolded the letter with both hands. My dear Connor, if you are reading this, then the world has taken more from you than I ever wanted it to. I'm sorry I couldn't shield you from all of it. But I want you to know something I never said aloud enough. You were never alone, son. Not then. Not now. Not ever. You were the strongest part of this family, even when you didn't believe it. And whatever comes after me, after all of this, I hope you let the quiet guide you instead of the fear. Your father loved you. I loved you. That's the truth that lives beyond every secret we tried to bury. Be free, my boy, and don't walk the hard parts alone. Mum. The words blurred. Connor blinked hard, but the tears came anyway, falling silently onto the paper. Baron pressed his head against Connor's shoulder, warm and steady. Connor held the letter against his chest, closing his eyes as a year's worth of weight shifted inside him. The grief was still there, softened but not erased. But beneath it was something new, a slow, steady warmth, a kind of forgiveness that felt like it came from the snow itself. He whispered into the cold air, I miss you, Mom. Baron let out a low, gentle whine and leaned harder into him. I know, Connor said, placing a hand on the shepherd's back. We're okay now, really. Snow continued to fall around them, quiet as a blessing. The mountains loomed in the distance, but they no longer felt threatening. The danger was gone. The shadows were gone. What remained was a man, his dog, and a letter buried deep enough to survive every storm. Connor folded the note carefully and slipped it into his coat. Then he wrapped an arm around Baron and pulled him close. Let's go inside, buddy, he murmured. We've got a good life to build. Baron nudged him, then walked at his side, limping but loyal. Together they stepped back toward the cabin, toward warmth, toward healing, toward the quiet life his mother always wanted for him, a life he was finally ready to claim. Spring broke over Sapphire Ridge in slow breaths, warming the valley one patch of earth at a time. Snow retreated from the hillsides, revealing the first threads of green. A new season, a new year, a new beginning. For the first time since he'd returned home, Connor felt like the world wasn't holding its breath anymore. It was breathing with him. The cabin was rebuilt. The scars on the land had faded. And the quiet that once felt like a weight now felt like a place to plant something new. Connor did exactly that. The old general store in town had been abandoned for years, its windows dusted over, its roof sagging. But it sat at the heart of the valley, and the moment Connor stepped inside, he felt something shift. A space where people once gathered, a space that could hold stories, and pain, and healing. He bought it with what little he had and spent months restoring it with his own hands. Sanded floors, repaired beams, fresh paint on the walls. He left the original wooden sign hanging above the door, but added a new plaque beneath it. Echo of Hope Veteran Center. A name that felt like a second heartbeat. On opening day, the sky glowed a soft morning gold. People came early. Neighbors, ranchers, even teenagers who had helped stack lumber or sweep floors when Connor wasn't looking. A few veterans from nearby towns showed up quietly, their hands in their coat pockets, their eyes wary. Connor understood that kind of caution. Baron walked through the crowd like he'd been born for it. He wore a small, dark blue therapy vest embroidered with his name. The limp was still there, but he moved with the proud, steady gait of a dog who had faced death and come out the other side stronger. Kids knelt to pet him. Older men touched his head gently, their faces softening in ways they didn't expect. A woman in her 70s whispered, "Good boy." And Baron leaned against her like he could hold up whatever she was carrying inside. He had become more than a survivor. He had become a healer. Connor stood on the small outdoor deck of the center, watching the crowd with hands resting on the railing. The last year had aged him in ways he couldn't describe, but it had also opened something inside him, something his mother had been trying to protect all along. Deputy Ray Jacobs walked up beside him, coffee in hand. He nodded toward the building. "Looks like you built something real here." "Didn't build it alone?" Connor said. Ray laughed quietly. "Yeah, that mutt of yours does half the work." As if on cue, Baron glanced back at them, tail swinging once before returning to a group of teenagers showing him their baseball gloves. He placed a paw on one of the boy's sneakers, and the kid laughed, a sound bright enough to warm the entire porch. Ray sipped his coffee. "You ever think your mom knew this would happen?" Connor's chest tightened at the question, but not in a painful way. "I think she hoped for it," he said. "She always wanted this valley to be more than its ghosts. And now it is." Not long after the doors opened, veterans began trickling inside. Men and women of different ages, different wars, each carrying something in their eyes they didn't know how to set down. Connor greeted them one by one, never asking questions they weren't ready to answer. A Marine with a prosthetic leg paused beside Baron. The dog nudged his hand gently, as if sensing the exact moment the man needed someone to notice he was there. The Marine swallowed, wiping his eyes. "You trained him for this?" Connor shook his head. "No, he trained me." The man barked out a soft laugh. "Fails like that?" By noon, the center buzzed with life. People sat in small groups, some talking, some silent. There was no program, no speeches, just space. A place where no one had to pretend they were fine. Connor moved through the room, answering questions, adjusting furniture, offering coffee. Every time he passed Baron, the shepherd glanced up as if checking in. "Still with me?" Connor asked silently. "Always," Baron's steady gaze seemed to reply. Later that afternoon, an older veteran with trembling hands approached Connor. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I heard what you and your dog went through last year," he said. "People talk about it like it's some kind of miracle." Connor didn't know how to respond at first. The word miracle didn't feel right, but survival did. Loyalty did. Sacrifice did. "We just held on," Connor said quietly. "That's all." The man nodded. "Sometimes holding on is the miracle." As the crowd thinned, Connor stepped outside to catch a breath. The sun dipped behind the ridge, washing the valley in amber light. A breeze lifted the scent of pine and thawed earth. He felt someone at his side. Baron sat there, posture tall, head high, watching the sunset with him as if keeping vigil over a horizon they could finally trust. Connor rested a hand on his back. "Mom would have liked this place." Baron let out a low huff, warm and soft. "She didn't just save me," Connor said. "She saved every person who walks through that door. She planted this seed long before I understood what it meant." He looked at the building glowing with lamplight, people, laughing inside, tears being dried, stories being told. A refuge born from pain, weathered in silence, now alive again. His mother's legacy, a seed finally grown. Baron leaned into his leg, and Connor felt that old ache shift into something steady, something good. "You and me, buddy," he whispered. "We'll keep this going. For her." The German shepherd lifted his head, eyes reflecting the last gold of the day. Together they walked back toward Echo of Hope, into a warm room filled with people who needed exactly what the two of them had fought so hard to find. A place where healing didn't just happen, it lived. The morning of the grand opening arrived with a clear sky stretched wide over Sapphire Ridge, the kind of blue that looked scrubbed clean after years of storms. A soft wind rolled down from the mountains, as if the whole valley had come to witness something worth remembering. Connor stood on the small wooden stage outside Echo of Hope, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He was never comfortable in front of crowds, but today felt different. Today wasn't about attention. It was about gratitude, survival, and the strange, quiet mercy of second chances. Baron lay at his feet, wearing his therapy vest, tail thumping lazily every time someone called his name. Kids clustered near him. Veterans leaned down to give him gentle scratches. Even the sheriff, a man who rarely showed emotion in public, knelt to press a hand to the shepherd's chest. The dog accepted all of it with calm dignity, like he understood what this place meant and what he had helped build. A small crowd formed as local reporters set up their equipment. The center hummed behind them, with the voices of veterans sharing coffee, laughter, and the kind of silence that only exists between people who have walked through fire and come out the other side. A young journalist lifted her camera and stepped forward. "Mr. Hale," she said, microphone raised. "One question everyone seems to be asking is, why keep Baron with you? After everything the two of you went through, many handlers retire their service dogs or leave them with a specialist, but you stayed together. Why?" Connor looked down at Baron. The shepherd glanced up, ears twitching, as if he sensed the shift in the air. The faint scar along his shoulder caught the morning light. His limp was still there, subtle but permanent. A mark of what he had given up. Connor's smile was soft, steady, and full of something deeper than pride. "He didn't take the hit for me," he said. "He took the chance to keep me alive." The reporter held still, her breath caught. The crowd quieted the way a room quiets when something true lands hard. Connor crouched beside Baron, running a hand over the dog's neck. "He saved me long before any of this, before the firefight, before the mountain, before the secrets. He saved me the day I came home from the war, trying to figure out how to breathe again. He didn't just protect my life, he gave it direction." Baron nudged his knee, a low groan of affection rolling from his chest. Connor stood, turned toward the camera, and let the truth settle in his voice. "There's a reason this place exists," he said. "Because of him. Because of my mum. Because sometimes the only thing that pulls us out of the dark is loyalty we didn't know how to ask for." He looked straight into the lens. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The wind shifted just then, brushing across his shoulders the way his mother used to when he was a boy, afraid of thunderstorms. He felt the warmth of it even in the cold air, as if she were standing somewhere behind the crowd, finally at peace, knowing her son had found his way back. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Some wiped their eyes. A few clapped. Then the applause grew, rolling through the valley like a slow, rising wave. Baron lifted himself onto all fours, walked in front of Connor, and sat facing the crowd, steady, proud, unafraid, as if claiming his place in the story. Connor laughed under his breath. "Show off," he whispered, and Baron's tail swept the stage. The ceremony continued with speeches and handshakes, but the moment that stayed with everyone wasn't any official announcement. It was the image of a weathered veteran and his battered German shepherd standing shoulder to shoulder, both carrying scars, both refusing to let those scars define them. When the reporters packed up and the visitors drifted inside, Connor lingered on the porch. The mountain stood tall above him, no longer a threat, but a witness. Baron pressed against his leg, warm and grounding. "We did it." Connor whispered. Baron answered with a single bark, sharp, bright, alive. The wind picked up again, brushing over them, carrying the scent of pine and the faint sweetness of spring. Healing didn't happen in a single day. But it happened here, in this valley, in this man, in this dog. And as the sun climbed higher, touching the roof of Echo of Hope with gold, Connor knew this wasn't the end of their story, just the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter they would write together. If you watching this felt something, if a part of you has ever been saved by a loyal companion, let us know. Share this journey. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel so more stories like Connor and Baron's can find the people who need them most. Because somewhere out there, another veteran and another dog are waiting for their chapter to be told.